Over 12,000 years ago, a revolution began to spread throughout the world. Humankind began to transition from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to one of settlement, thanks to agriculture, the emerging practice of farming. Indigenous to Central Asia, cannabis is believed to have existed in the region since the pre-Neolithic period. The Chinese people first cultivated cannabis as early as 4000 BCE. Referred to as ma, the fibers of the plant stalk known as hemp, the non-psychoactive form of cannabis, were beaten off by hand to create paper and cloth. Around this time, stories of a mythical Chinese emperor named Shen Nung began to surface. These portray him as an early proponent of cultivating cannabis for both paper and cloth, and as a champion of cannabis for medicinal and recreational purposes. As the stories go, Shen Nung was a herbalist whose findings were reportedly documented in The Great Herbal, an ancient guide that has since been rewritten and updated and is still in use by practitioners of traditional Chinese medicine today. The Great Herbal stated that cannabis is good for the 5 organs, as well as bringing the body into yin-yang balance. The text also stated that cannabis was good for your skin, stomach, hair, and energy, and that it could help you let go, and if consumed long enough, could teach people how to talk to the gods. And much like how cannabis is wind-pollinated, its usage wafted westward across the different regions and cultures of the ancient world. In India, cannabis was mentioned in the Vedas, the oldest scriptures of Hinduism. There, cannabis would later be referred to as the food of the gods. Ground into paste with a mortar and pestle, it was given an edible preparation. And allegedly, a holy man did eat cannabis. It is said that Buddha ate a single seed daily for 6 years while meditating. From India to the Middle East and on to Africa, cannabis continued its spread, passed from Indian Hindu travelers to mystic Sufi travelers. As European commerce and conquest intersected with the Middle East and India, cannabis traveled to new continents, specifically to the Western Hemisphere, courtesy of the Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, British, and French, who made it a necessity for their empires back home in Europe. The rise of hemp increased both the design and quality of ships' ropes and sails. This enabled boats to sail further and ushered in the Age of Sail, where Europeans colonized present-day North America. In 1588, the British had an estimated 10,000 acres worth of hemp in their fleet's rope and sails. Becoming the primary power on the waters, the British were so dependent on hemp, their farmers couldn't meet demand. So they began to import it from Russia. From antiquity into modernity, the possibilities of cannabis grew with the rise of industrialization, science, and medicine, no more so than in Europe and North America. As the New World became home to new colonies, the continent became home to new industries, enforced by royal demands and growing empire. In the 17th century, Jean Talon, the representative of King Louis XIV in Quebec, confiscated thread to encourage inhabitants to grow hemp. And in the British colonies, King James made hemp cultivation mandatory for ship sails to ensure British supremacy on the high seas. Cultivation wasn't just for the maritime age, it was for the modern medicinal age too. That same century, Louis Hébert, apothecary to Samuel de Champlain, planted the first known cannabis plant in Canada in 1606. While the Greeks had long thrown cannabis onto hot coals in spas to relax, Dr. William Brooke O'Shaughnessy was the first European to throw cannabis into rigorous medical testing during the 19th century. He found it had great value as a sedative and anticonvulsive, relieving the pain of rheumatism, stopping convulsions, and quelling muscle spasms. Validating Indian folk uses of cannabis through a medical lens, O'Shaughnessy popularized cannabis's therapeutic uses in medical papers. O'Shaughnessy's papers created buzz, starting a trend of turning pot into patent medicines, the precursor to over-the-counter medicine. By the early 20th century, 2,000 different cannabis medicines were being produced by close to 300 manufacturers in the West. Unregulated patent medicines, some of which were dangerous, were advertised with unsubstantiated and often fraudulent claims about their efficacy. This caught the ire of American authorities, who implemented the Pure Food and Drug Act at the start of the 20th century, an action believed to set cannabis on the course to criminalization. In Canada, racism, propaganda, and scare tactic journalism combined to influence the criminalization of cannabis, which was added to the Schedule of Restricted Drugs in 1923 under the Narcotics Drug Act Amendment Bill. Cannabis may have been prohibited in Canada, but its popularity increased over the 20th century, creating problems for consumers and authorities alike. While there was little usage between 1930 and 1946, where there were only 25 cannabis convictions, cannabis's usage soared from the 60s onwards, as evidenced by the 12,000 convictions alone in 1972. The arrests inspired action. In 1969, the Canadian government created the Royal Commission of Inquiry in the non-medical use of drugs. Known as the Ledane Commission, its 1972 report recommended the removal of criminal penalties for cannabis possession. Despite the Commission's recommendation, legislation did not change. So courageous Canadians fought for change. Lawyer John Conroy won high-profile cases that asserted cannabis did not present significant harm and stalled bans on patient cultivation. Dr. Mark Ware spent decades researching the safety and effectiveness of cannabis in pain and symptom management, changing opinions in the medical community. And activists like Hilary Black, who founded Canada's first Compassion Club, dispensed medical cannabis to patients before legal avenues for such existed. As citizens advocated for cannabis, Health Canada began to regulate access to cannabis for medical purposes. In 2014, they created an official program that enabled legal cannabis production by authorized licensed producers, like Tweed. Regulated, responsible, and reliable licensed producers like Tweed were permitted to safely cultivate medical cannabis for Canadian patients. However, cannabis for recreational use was still illegal. But in 2015, Canadians elected Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister, in part because of his promise to legalize the recreational use of cannabis nationally, a promise that passed with C-45, the Cannabis Act. Legalization didn't just end prohibition, it ushered in a new and exciting era for Canada and Canadians alike. Becoming the first G7 country to legalize cannabis nationally, Canada created safe and convenient access for all adult consumers, a legal market, and a new source of revenue for all levels of government. What a trip!